An ancient man, a rich tyrant, two smucks from New York, and their lady of the left. On this episode of Ruined Childhoods, we decide the fate of Ishtar.
Sequel. Reboot. Which one will it be?
It's the Ruined Childhoods podcast.
Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to Ruined Childhoods, your favorite podcast where two people you may or may not know talk about movies you may or may not seen or have seen and talk about whether there are going to be sequels, prequels, reboots, or remakes that you may or may not want to happen.
Very good explanation, Dan.
Thank you, John.
And although people might not know who we are, some people may have heard of our guest today, critic and writer in New York, Carrie Courogen. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, how are you?
Doing all right. We're really excited to have you on because if anybody does follow you on Twitter, they would know that you are both an Elaine May and Twitter Ishtar enthusiast. So this is exciting for me to talk to someone else who's excited about Ishtar.
I am very excited to have this conversation.
I'm excited to be here.
So on our last episode, we talked about the classic Robert Altman film, The Long Goodbye. Carrie, are you familiar with that one?
I'm familiar with it. I actually have to admit I've never seen it.
Oh, okay. Well, it's bananas in a different way than Ishtar is bananas. And it's a trip. You got to see it. I just had one more thing I wanted to mention about The Long Goodbye. We had talked about. Okay, this is actually not about The Long Goodbye. This actually goes back to 2 episodes ago in a completely unrelated thing. We were talking about Christopher Hewitt, Mr. Belvedere, who was also in The Producers, and you were talking about how he, his character was a drag queen, but what if we combined these two characters and create an amazing drag performer named Ms. Belvedere?
Mrs. Belvedere? I'm sorry, I thought you were going in a different direction with that because I thought, Mrs. Doubtfire. No. No, Ms. Belvedere. All right.
Just a thought.
Okay.
But because we have Carrie here, I think we should probably launch into Ishtar.
And I would say we have quite a bit to talk about, don't we?
I think so. Before I launch into a synopsis of this film, which is way more detailed than they usually are because this is such a dense movie, I wanted to ask Carrie, what was your experience with Ishtar? How did it first come into your life?
So I've been an Elaine May fan since high school, and there was this wonderful article by Lindsay Zolads that came out on The Ringer last spring that sort of restarted my love for Elaine May, if you will. I was kind of like, oh my God, I love her, but I kind of forgot about her. And it talked about Ishtar, which was the one movie that I was always kind of like, oh, everyone says this is bad. I don't know if I want to see this because it might ruin my love for this filmmaker if it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then Alamo Drafthouse had a screening series that was like male friendships told by female filmmakers. And I just kind of was like, well, I'm a completist. And I was like, I have to see this because if I don't see this, then I have to have my own sort of judgment of it. And I went and I honestly laughed so hard I was crying. I was like, this movie is, what are they talking about? This movie is the worst movie ever. What? And then I subsequently over the summer, a film forum in New York City did an Elaine May retrospective, and I dragged many of my friends to see Ishtar in the theater.
Yes.
I was like, you have to see this movie.
And how grateful were they?
They were all pretty grateful, I have to say. Like, not to toot my own horn, but they were like, oh my God, you were right.
And you've also written a few articles about Ishtar and Elaine May. We'll put links to those in this episode's description. But what was it then? Has been the response from the writings that you've done about this subject matter?
I mean, I think the response has been, it's my pieces have been one of a few of many over the past year or so that are reconsidering Elaine May and her work and the ways that she didn't get her dues in her time. And I think the response has mostly just been like, oh, thank you for this. Like, she is great. Like, we need more articles that are saying how great she is. Totally.
Agreed.
I don't know. I was pretty sucked into your writing about her and Ishtar itself. So I'm going to launch into, I would usually say a quick synopsis. This is not quick. I had to watch this movie twice, once to like really wrap my head around what was going on and actually just like figure out what really was happening, and then another time just to enjoy it. And I caught myself just laughing so hard. This movie's so funny in the weirdest ways, and the sincerity with which Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty play their characters is, I don't know, it's kind of just magnetic. And you can't forget Charles Grodin, Carol Kane, just such an amazing cast. So here we go. And take notes in case I miss anything or get something wrong, because so much of the details of this movie happen in like whispered dialogue. So I'm going to launch into it. Chuck the Hawk Clarke and Lyle Rogers are the hottest undiscovered talents on New York's indie music scene, or at least they are to themselves. After they meet with Marty, a deadbeat agent, they finally have a chance to play a paying gig, either in Honduras or Morocco. They choose Morocco because Clarke says it's safer. By the way, I'm going with their names as Clarke and Rogers because that's how they go as a music duo. So Clarke says that Morocco's safer. Meanwhile, in Ishtar, a city near the Moroccan border, an archaeologist finds a map that prophesizes that two messengers will appear during a time of upheaval, and through them, the poor and lowly will rise up and the mighty will be humbled. The archaeologist's colleague is concerned that it could start a holy war that would inflame the entire Middle East. Citing that Ishtar is currently on the brink of revolution, he advises that the map stays a secret. Word is out that the map has been discovered, and the archaeologist is hunted down and killed, but not before he hides the map, only to be found again by the two messengers. After Rogers and Clarke land at the Ishtar airport, Clarke is approached by what he thinks is a young gentleman who asks him a favor. She needs his passport, jacket, and the contents of his suitcase in exchange for hers. Assured by the woman that the U.S. Embassy will issue him a new passport by the time he needs to be in Marrakesh for his gig, Clarke agrees. Perhaps he was dazzled by her claim that anyone who has the nickname Hawk must be bold and in search of adventure. Or maybe he was enchanted by the sight of her stealthily exposed breast. After Rogers gets back from a coffee run, Clarke tells him that he bought a new jacket and lost his passport, but will get one from the embassy lickety-split. Claiming that the country is on the brink of civil war, the ambassador tells him that there's no way that he can help him, and so Rogers splits to Marrakesh and Clarke heads to a hotel where he meets Jim Harrison, who happens to be a CIA agent and wants to buy Clarke dinner, claiming that he's excited to see another American. He is in Ishtar because the communists are trying to arrange a coup and take over. After hearing that the CIA is looking for regular folks to get paid to act as informants, and that's how the CIA recruits agents, Clarke is very interested in this opportunity, but mostly just takes advantage of Jim's influence at the embassy to get into Morocco. Rogers and Clarke are reunited and have a fantastic first show, playing all covers. Later that night, a mysterious person comes to their hotel room, attempting to take Clarke's suitcase. Rogers has a scuffle with what he thinks is a 15-year-old boy, but is actually the same woman from the airport. Oh, sorry, I just need to catch my breath. She informs him that Clarke is working for the CIA, an organization that is working to keep the tyrant who rules Ishtar in power. He begs Rogers to help her overthrow Ishtar's ruler by letting her get back the contents of the suitcase. To show that he will help her, he must go to the market, find Muhammad, tell him that he wants to buy a blind camel. Meanwhile, Clarke meets up with Agent Jim, who informs him that he knows that he and Shira had contact. Shira is what they believe was the young boy, and is also the archaeologist's sister. He informs Clarke that Shira is a left-wing agent whose brother found a map that could destabilize the entire Middle East, which would be bad because Morocco just signed a pact with Gaddafi. The CIA wants to find the map before the libs, and Agent Jim tells Clarke that he believes that Rogers is a left-wing agent. The next day, Rogers and Clarke are on a walk through the town market, each hinting to the other that they need to know what's up, but not before long. Ishtari goons take hold of Rogers and Clarke. After an international gunfight in the town square, Agent Jim meets up with the leader of Ishtar, Ammar Youssef, played by Fred Melamed, to tell him that the Americans are pawns, but he believes that they're messengers of God that that the map speaks of, and that they're actually radical Shiites. He believes that if the messengers are executed, it proves his power. Back in town, oh my God, there's still so much more. Rogers finds a camel merchant named Muhammad and begins to broker a deal. Rogers is keeping an eye on him from a hotel room where he is confronted by Shira, who thinks that he gave the map to Agent Jim. It turns out Clarke is all butthurt that Shira didn't recruit him as a communist, but instead recruits Rogers. After they procure a blind camel and some fresh duds, Agent Jim tells Clarke to head southeast into the desert until they get to the Paragon Oasis. Meanwhile, Shira speaks with her commie buds, and they realize how Rogers and Clarke need to die in order for them to get the map. So she finds Rogers, tells him that they are in danger, and they need to go into the desert and drop these beads that'll glow in the dark so they can follow them back into town. The insurgents have insurance and hired hitmen to find Rogers and Clarke to finish the job of the desert in case that doesn't kill them first. After hours of roaming the desert, Rogers and Clarke are up Schitt's Creek. They're thirsty, they're going to miss their show, and then all of the truth comes out about the CIA and Shira. They survive the night after a windstorm and happen upon a black market gun deal. Clarke gets mistaken for the auctioneer who knows the dialect of all the different tribes. With Rogers in similar garb to the arms buyers, he acts as a plant to further convince the arms dealers that Clarke is legit. It somehow works and the sales start flowing, and once Rogers and Clarke hit rock bottom afterwards, they discover that the lining of Clarke's jacket has the map sewn into it. The CIA finds them in the desert, about to shoot them dead. This is also, by the way, spoiler town, so fast forward if you don't want to know exactly what happens. The CIA finds them and is about to shoot them dead, but once they realize that they're not being rescued, Rogers and Clarke use the guns from the sale to shoot back, and suddenly Shira shows up at the hired cab and she brings an arsenal. They deflect the choppers. Cut to Marty and the agent has the map. Marty, the agent, has the map and is brokering a deal with Agent Jim at the CIA. The terms are that social reforms in Ishtar, dictated by Shira, must be enforced, and a live in-concert album by Rogers and Clarke, financed and promoted globally by the government, happens, culminating in the most amazing concert with forced military applause. Meanwhile, in Portland, Oregon, some dude has never done more pausing and rewinding. I know I missed a ton. How did I do, Carrie? Was that okay?
I mean, I think you hit every beat. It's a lot.
There's so much. It's so dense.
Well,
it's like three movies in one.
Yeah. And also, like, didn't even talk about, like, the way that Rogers and Clarke met each other. And it's like the longest flashback in movie history. Well, and it's so good. And so I had trouble. It's one of the few. So it's funny. I also watched it twice, and it's funny to look at my notes from the first viewing and my notes from the second viewing, because it's almost like I started watching a different movie, just because there was so much that, like you said, after watching it once and just following the plot, watching it a second time and being able to focus on some of those really subtle lines of dialogue that are just hilarious, and the lyrics of the songs, which God, it's so funny. Am in love with. Written by Paul Williams.
Paul Williams, yes. I mean, God, Dangerous Business has been stuck in my head for days. Totally.
I mean, I keep waiting for them to release the soundtrack. That's like my one qualm with the
Is there no
qualm with the
soundtrack?
film. I don't think there's actually an official soundtrack, but like
I haven't found one.
They could do snippets.
I looked on Spotify for Rogers and Clarke, but like they're a techno act. It's like
what?
It's not. Yeah, I was like, oh wait, Rogers and maybe they released under Rogers and Clarke. Nope, it is not the same Rogers and Clarke. But
there's nothing official.
Yeah, well, I mean, this movie famously didn't do well and has been unfairly mocked. I don't know. I mean, Carrie, like you were saying, it's like if people give it a chance, they can see actually, I don't know, like how great it really is. And yeah, the songs are hilarious. And watching them come up with the lyrics felt really authentic. It felt like I was really peeking in on these two guys trying to write what they think is the most brilliant song about how great it is to be a liar and how bad it is to be honest. Oh, it's so weird. But didn't even mention how like their relationships dissolve. We kind of get robbed. I wish that there was more Carol Kane in there. But
always want more Carol Kane in anything.
I know.
Carol Kane is just always, she just is so, her characters, her roles are so, she's so good-hearted, and she just gets so abused by these men who just kind of use her as a space filler. And you just feel for her.
Hey, what are your guys' favorite Carol Kane roles?
I mean, it's hard to think off the top of my head.
Simca.
I do really... Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Simca from Taxi.
Oh,
Totally. That would be my favorite.
For me, my mind, I just go straight to Transylvania 65000. I just love her so much in that.
Yes.
But I think that's also just because, like, when I was a kid, I watched that probably more than anything else featuring Carol Kane. So
True.
Yeah, it's just stuck in my psyche.
I mean, Taxi is up there for me. I also think, like, it's just been so great to see her in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt and have this, like,
she's so funny
sort of resurgence with young people, if that makes sense.
Oh, and she was...
Yeah, and Hunters, too.
Yeah, on Hunters. That's right, yeah. She's great on Hunters. So...
Yeah.
Real
quick, what would each of you do for an Ishtar passport stamp? I saw that, like, there's a scene when they're in the airport and they get their passport stamps with Ishtar on it, and I was like... Oh man, like that would be such an awesome like movie prop to own, like the Ishtar passport stamp.
It should be. That would be really cool.
You should have. It should be like a badge of honor. Like, yes, I watched Ishtar. I you know, like, because like you, Carrie, I had that same reluctance of, and I'd actually tried watching it a few times in the past and never made it past, I think, just like, what are they do? What are Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman doing? And what is this? And I couldn't get past that. And that was actually kind of one of my questions was for your average film goer, because the movie was #1 at the box office the weekend it came out. Right. And, you know, people saw it, people gave it a chance. But is this the type of movie that for your average viewer is going to really appreciate greatly on a second viewing? And like, what do? Do you tell someone like, look, the first time you're not going to know what the hell's going on, but trust me, it's going to be worth it for the second time you see it?
This should just be double features with Ishtar and then Ishtar again.
I mean, I think a lot of average viewers, and especially when it came out, like they don't know what to do with a film that pointedly casts these two actors, these two really well-known actors against type. Mm-hmm. Like it's you watch it and you're kind of like, what did I just watch? Like these aren't these guys at all. And at the time too, it's like so not used to what you're seeing. I mean, Warren Beatty playing the like quote unquote ugly one of the two, like with Dustin Hoffman as the ladies' man. Like what?
And and it's that I bought because you could tell he's kind of full of shit anyway with the whole Hawk business. But Warren Beatty, and the performance was so genuine that the first time I watched it, and he's making all these jokes about being big and from Texas, and I wanted it to be Randy Quaid, right. or like a John Goodman. But then the second time I watched it, I felt more, like you said, like they're very intentionally being cast against type and playing against type. And it's when I think that for me was one of the first pieces of the puzzle when I started to see what was really kind of under the surface, under what I had seen the first time. So I'm glad I watched it.
Yeah, it's like that's just another layer of the joke. It's like it's like an undercurrent to the whole thing.
Oh, and
like once you unlock that.
Right. And I wanted to ask you, because there were a few things I picked up on, and I thought to myself, is this coincidence or is this intentional? But I found several references to Dustin Hoffman's career. Telling the truth can be dangerous business. All the President's Men.
Huh.
Where else? I have a bunch of these written down where I'm like, when they're in the bar after Warren Beatty, after Lyle's wife leaves him, and they're in the bar, the woman that Dustin Hoffman is flirting with, her name is Dorothy. There's kind of the obsession that was like, okay, that coincidence. But then there's also the obsession with Simon and Garfunkel, and who famously created the soundtrack to the Graduate. Not to mention also the scenes of Hoffman as the smaller, fast talker walking down the New York City streets with the taller, bigger kind of hayseed. It's Midnight Cowboy.
Wow, Dan.
Did either of you have either of you like noticed this? Am I just like, have I been stuck in my basement way too long?
I guess I have to watch it a third time now.
Oh, darn it.
No, I mean, I definitely noticed the last part, the juxtaposition of him being the small, fast talker, and I think that had to have been intentional. Like, I don't know if I caught the other ones that you mentioned, but like now that you say them, it makes sense in my mind.
And then we're talking about layers here. There's the added layer of the Simon and Garfunkel parallel, a shorter one who kind of saw himself as the genius of the group, and the taller one who was seemingly, I guess, almost riding the coattails.
He was the Garfunkel,
of
Simon and Garfunkel,
Lyle. So there was so much once that that Pandora's box opened. Yeah, I found myself just thinking, like, am I looking for things? Am I finding things because I want to find them, or what? I don't know.
Having known you for literally my entire life, Carrie, we are brothers. Having known you my entire life. Yes, you do that, and it's wonderful, and it's sometimes it's like maybe a stretch, but in this case, I don't think so. I think that you made some very good observations here.
I think if like the original intent for the film was, what if we update a road movie, like a Crosby and Hope road movie? It was kind of like, who are the parallels, contemporary parallels now? Like a duo. Oh, I guess it's Simon and Garfunkel. Whoa, wouldn't it be funny if Simon and Garfunkel weren't talented, one, and then two were performing in Morocco?
Yeah, it's really, I don't know, astonishing to watch. And the more you watch this movie, the more it unfolds. And that's just, I think, something that makes a really good movie, is like when you find new things in it every time. And when you're given more things to think about, I don't know. On my second viewing, some of the things that really stood out to me mostly took place in the flashback about how they met and everything, and like seeing, Lyle as the ice cream man who just like can't stop writing songs in his head and ignoring the kids, like. That was one of those funny things where I think the first time I was watching it, I was just like, wait, where are we in time? Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to catch up to myself.
It's not a clear transition. No,
but I don't know. Once it clicks, it's wonderful. It's really, really fun.
I think for me, I think because they had just come from like having an argument right before you go into the flashback, and then the flashback begins with Hoffman, playing behind the piano. I think that's the first part of the flashback. I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, so now they've gone their separate ways and they're going to come back together for this job. And the first time I watched it, I didn't catch that it was a flashback until well into it.
Yeah. So, Carrie, since you know way more about the history of this movie, what were some of the things that really bumped people when it was released? Why did it become this, like, I don't know, globally panned movie?
Well, it was kind of set up to fail from the beginning. Elaine May doesn't have a great track record with studios and with making a movie and sticking to schedule and sticking to budget. I mean, there's the famous story with Mikey and Nikki that she shot like over 1 million feet of film or something, like more than Gone with the Wind, and she wasn't sticking to the schedule and was a year behind, and the studio wanted to release their own cut, so she stole reels of film and hid them in her garage to prevent them from doing so. And Ishtar was like no different. I mean, she got this chance to make this movie because she had been such an instrumental part in Tootsie and in Reds, and both Beatty and Hoffman were kind of like, we owe her. And Beatty especially used his star power to kind of convince the studio heads that she would behave this time. I remember I read an article that was very much like the studio head was like, will you behave? And it was like using those exact words that was just so like patronizing. Like Warren Beatty's also a perfectionist and kind of eccentric with his filmmaking and wasn't asked that. But it all kind of fell apart when they went to Morocco. Elaine May just like, it's a very ambitious film for Elaine to make this action comedy in a sense. And it went over budget by like, I don't know how many. It was, at the time, it was the most expensive comedy ever made. And the head of the studio changed in between. And the guy who came in had a grudge with Warren Beatty. And he also had a grudge with expensive movie making. And so now in the past few years, it's come out that like all this bad press the film was getting as it was made. I mean, stories from set being like, oh, Elaine is saying, flatten these dunes. I don't want them. And they're like, you can't do that. And everything about costs running over and making her seem incompetent. They were all planted by the studio head. Mike Nichols said, I think, something like, this is the single prime example to me of a studio committing suicide. Like they just wanted to set an example with this film and maligned it from the start. And that was what critics focused on. And so it's kind of like you're going into the movie almost expecting it to be bad. And then with that viewpoint, it's sort of hard to recover from that.
Wow.
Right, because you're also not presenting a movie that's necessarily it doesn't spoon feed. It's not necessarily the easiest movie to like if you don't know what you're expecting when you sit down to watch it.
Totally. It's like you've made an already sort of difficult to love film even more difficult to process. And then, I mean, the jokes just kind of piled on from there. And it was, I mean, for decades, it was considered one of the worst movies ever. There was a Far Side, cartoon that was like Hell's Video Store, and every shelf was filled with Ishtar. And it was only very recently that the cartoonist was like, you know, when I did that, I actually hadn't seen the movie, and I've watched it recently, and it's actually really funny. But it's weird to think that one cartoon in a syndicated newspaper like was so infamous and so had such a huge role tarnishing the reputation of a filmmaker and a pretty like benign comedy.
Come on, Gary Larson.
I can attest to the power of that cartoon because I love The Far Side. That was my favorite comic. And I remember that comic. I remember it being funny. That's also, I developed my sense of humor from listening to Weird Al Yankovic, reading Mad Magazine, and looking at The Far Side. So that was, I mean, I'm sure I was making Ishtar jokes before. I know I was making Ishtar jokes before I had ever seen it because I had only seen it this past week. So I think that Far Side comic honestly had a lot to do with it.
Gary Larson.
But he apologized.
You've ruined what could have been such a wonderful thing. Yeah, but still, if that affected the way that people would view something that they'd never seen before, then...
Yeah. No, it's true.
That sucks.
Yeah.
So another thing that I loved about Ishtar was the blind camel. And I just have to wonder, how do you think they did the Foley for that camel's voice? It is... so crazy.
Oh, that camel. I have no idea.
Come on, boy. Easy, boy. Easy, fella, kid. Easy, boy.
What the hell's the matter with him? Is he blind?
Well, yeah, he is, but he's in perfect condition. They use him for drawing well water up a track.
Lyle, are you crazy?
Look, I'm not supposed to have it permanently, I don't think. I think it's just I think it's a kind of a sign.
Lyle, give it to the camera. Let's get you out of the sun.
Well, sun can't hurt me. I got my cape here. Oh, God. I got a feeling something went wrong, and now I own a blind camel.
Lyle, put this over your face. Keep your head down, keep walking, and don't talk loud.
Why? What's that?
It's the craziest sounds ever.
Yeah. That camel.
I also
Wow.
love the interaction between Charles Grodin and Dustin Hoffman when they're like kind of talking behind the camel, and he's like, point at the camel, and he's like pointing at the camel the entire time. It's just so weird.
How much for the camel?
Jim,
Keep your
come
voice
on,
down,
glad
keep your
to-
voice down. Point at the camel as we speak.
How did you find this?
Beeper.
You mean this thing is a bug, too?
Only at close range. We use it basically to track with. The men in straw hats are members of Emir Yusuf's army. They're trying to kill you.
I thought Emir Yusuf was our guy.
He is, but he doesn't like the idea of your friend dealing with a known communist.
Oh!
Don't touch his mouth. One of his teeth is bad. Jim, I'd like to go over the Shira Assel situation with you. As one agent to another, I've heard the Emir is a prick.
Really? Well, we'll have to look into that. But the main thing is to get you out of town before you're recognized. Do you know anything about the desert?
Yeah, that's where Las Vegas is. Cute, huh?
That is cute, yeah. That's where Las Vegas. Yeah. It's a good one. Remember that. It's a good one.
Yeah.
You can stop pointing now.
Oh.
Stand up.
I don't know. It's just such like a funny, bizarre movie, and Charles Grodin is just like, oh my God, he's amazing.
He's
we've
amazing.
talked about him ad nauseum before.
Oh, Midnight Run, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way that he, when he has that dinner, that first time that he's sitting down with Dustin Hoffman, and he explains to him exactly how people are recruited as he's doing it. And Hoffman is so, and it, like, both of these guys are so easily manipulated. I mean, look, and I another thing I thought on the second viewing was how brilliant the commentary is that, hey, that Ishtar Assel can sway Dustin Hoffman just by showing her breast, and he's hypnotized.
Well, she's also so good at it throughout the entire movie. Like when they're sitting in that hotel room on the bed, and she's, getting the tears on, and she's just like getting him on her side, or when she is in, the other hotel room with Lyle and kind of recruiting him, it's just like, she sees them as, everybody sees them as these suckers. They're so manipulative. And at least for Ishtar Assel, like, she is so endeared by them by the end, like that she's just obsessed with them at that point, which is so
happy
wild.
Tears. Now, Isabella Adjani, I had heard, was dating Warren Beatty at the time, so I assumed that had something to do with her casting, though she's quite good, I think, in what she's given to do.
Yeah, I thought she's great. And also Warren Beatty, I mean, he was dating Madonna during Dick Tracy. It's kind of just like his thing, right?
Annette Bening, well,
Which co-star hasn't Warren Beatty dated?
I guess any of them since Annette Bening, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah.
You'd have to imagine.
I
Hopefully.
think. Because didn't they meet on Bugsy and that was it?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Isabella Adjani is awesome in this. She really takes what could be a very thin character and fills it out, and you really understand why she's doing what she's doing, and you can see the development about how she does come around to really liking these guys, these complete nitwits, and she also happens to really like their music, which is even better.
So that's why I want to ask both of you, John and Carrie, what's your favorite Rogers and Clarke song?
I mean, Dangerous Business is just so good.
I mean, Dangerous Business is it's such a bop. Like it shouldn't be. I mean, there are definitely standouts though in that final montage that I just kind of go back to, and I'm just like,
also,
what?
I love that how long they play that final scene.
Oh,
it goes on so much longer than it needs to, which is just so much fun. Well, so here's Dan. Here's something. Dan,
sorry.
here's something I want you to do really quick.
Yes.
Just really quick. Could you just sing me the beginning of Dangerous Business?
Oh, sure. Telling the truth is dangerous business. Honesty. Wait. Oh, shoot. What's the next line?
Honest
Telling
and
the
popular.
truth. Honest and popular don't go hand in hand. You can tell people you play the accordion. Oh, well, and it's also, I love how they incorporate that into the score.
Right. But Dan, now sing the first couple of lines of the song Seasons of Love from Rent.
525,600 minutes. Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
So just saying.
Wow. Another.
Just saying.
Yeah. Wow.
There might have been some influence there.
Did not catch that.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So Dan, what was your favorite Rogers and Clarke bopper?
Well, of course, Dangerous Business, especially the ending credits version with the gospel choir in the background. Right. Because I love just some of the lines, like, we can sing our hearts out and hopefully no neighbors complain.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to throw out a mention too. I'm leaving you some love in my will.
Oh my God. Well, that's
Such an absurdity.
a Clarke.
It's so right. It's Clarke, but that's the one that Rogers is. That gets him. He's so excited, and I love when Hoffman looks over at Beatty. Beatty's sitting at the table, and his wife is so embarrassed, and he's just like, "Man, I love that song."
The looks on their faces as he's singing that song is so good, like that family. And also, I think it might be during the very first Rogers and Clarke performance. Did you notice Dylan Baker as an extra in that scene?
Yes.
I saw Dylan Baker and I was like, oh, Dylan Baker's in this. And then he never says a word or shows up again. I was like, oh, because this is, I think, the same year that Planes, Trains, and Automobiles came out, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so that was kind of his breakout role, but same year he was really just an extra at a Rogers and Clarke gig.
Yes.
Which,
also,
by the way, that first show, I would buy albums for all those bands that perform.
Oh, those montages are so great. I love the one that's like the girl group singing I'm quitting high school because you don't like me. I'm like, I need more of that song. It's just so
really
stupid and so good.
I mean, did Paul Williams never record any of these?
I read somewhere recently that they literally only wrote those snippets.
Oh my God.
Which I don't know how your brain can work that you don't even have to write the full song. You can have the idea of the song and write 2 lines or a chorus to it and that works. But they just recorded everything live.
I mean, I have a feeling that Paul Williams just farts out a masterpiece once an hour without anybody else ever hearing it. He's that good at songwriting.
Oh,
just saying.
Yeah.
But you have to be, but to be good at being bad like this, to be that good, so good that you can be good at being bad. It reminded me a lot of the songs from the Christopher Guest films, from Waiting for Guffin, from Mighty Wind. The music reminded me so much of those songs, especially in the lyrics.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to wonder. Well, I mean, Michael McKean and Christopher Guest, they were definitely coming up around this time and getting more and more popular around this time. Yeah. So I don't know. I wonder if there's just shared influences between them and Paul Williams, or if they've ever. I don't know if they've ever worked together actually.
To me, it's like we're talking about that whole early to mid 80s SNL, New York comedy scene. And I could see Paul Williams fitting right in there with them. Yeah,
totally. Before we move on to talking about kind of life beyond Ishtar, is there anything else that we want to cover before we move on?
I had a question. So Carrie, I've only seen the director's cut. Have you seen both cuts of the film, the theatrical and the director's cut?
I have. There's really not much of a difference. I think there's one extra like part to a scene, like an extra minute or two in the theatrical version that has been cut. It's the first time I've ever seen a director's version that's shorter than the theatrical version.
I didn't realize that it was shorter. That's amazing.
By like a minute or two, something.
Yeah.
It's like the most minute difference that it's, I think it just, but that alone speaks to the perfectionism and the need for control that Elaine May has, that at some point they indulged in her desire to have a director's cut out. Because, I mean, if you look at her film, A New Leaf, like that's something that her version versus what was released is radically different. And that never got a director's cut. But for this, it's like, did you really need that? But yeah, it's like, it's not a difference at all.
It's more of just marketing.
Marketing, yeah.
I don't know.
Marketing,
I guess so.
just like healing old wounds. I don't know.
Yeah. Another point I wanted to bring up and just get both of your thoughts on is, because the movie starts filming in 1985, and in 1986, I remember there being there was a lot of conflict with Libya. Like, we were on the verge of war with Libya. Whereas before 86, like, it wouldn't have been, I was, I don't know, 8 years old. I wouldn't have been aware of it. I was aware of Libya in 1986. And by summer 1987, you have the Iran-Contra hearings. So people might be a little bit more familiar with what the CIA does. I can't help but wonder what correlation that news in 1986, 1987, what impact that might have had on, the production, the marketing of this. Like, how much more difficult just does Middle East politics make it to make this film?
Yeah, I think it's like, it's one of those things where it's so prescient when you see the way that she sort of Elaine has this cutting commentary on America's involvement in the Middle East, and could see that our involvement was bubbling up, but to only have it escalate as it was going on and then have that coming to a boil as it came out. I think it was probably like, I mean, we've seen it with a lot of Iraq comedies in the early 2000s. It's like, it's a little bit like, oh, too soon. We're not ready to process that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, I just felt like, man, the idea of seeing a comedy about like all of this, Middle East set comedy, that might have been. It's like how there's a lot of things right now that I'm sure this is very funny, and I'm sure I would find it amusing, but right now I can't laugh at this. It's
right.
Yeah. So I was wondering how much that might have hurt Ishtar's chances at success, especially because, it does have quite a bit going for it.
Yeah. And also, things are so different now than they were then in terms of representation, acting in movies. And, in this, you certainly have people who are not representing the cultures that they are actually from. I don't know Fred Melamed's heritage. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that that's who that was. He's just been such a big presence in comedy lately. And to think of him, in the 80s doing something like this and looking so wildly different. And I had to think like, oh, that is not actually the way that I don't know, unless I just don't know enough about Fred Melamed's background, but I don't think that's, an accurate representation, certainly, of that culture. Also, Isabel Adjani, I don't believe is, I don't know where she's from actually, or what her heritage is, but nowadays I think people are starting to get a little bit more aware of that, and should something like this be made now, I think that it would be done a little bit differently. And I guess, Dan, I want to ask you, 2020 or 2021, after global pandemic is over, how would you imagine Ishtar will be brought back?
Why, as a Broadway musical, of course.
Oh, okay. Carrie, this is a common thing with Dan. He wants to bring everything back as a musical.
John,
Broadway musical.
I have, in my defense, we have not had one, and I only say it when I feel it honestly, and we haven't had one in a while. The Long Goodbye would not make a good musical. Major League, perhaps, but Seconds, I don't think so. But Ishtar with the music, and I think that now, I think that's a way for it to find its appreciation, to find a new life, and to... You have a lot of these, a lot of cult movies that become musicals and take on a new life. And I could really see Ishtar working as a musical. You could, and initially I was thinking, my initial thoughts, because I was also thinking of different pairs of actors that I would have liked to have seen do it over the years, like a Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, circa 2010. Ishtar would have been, would have been quite something. Like Rick Moranis, John Candy. I was like Billy Crystal, John Goodman in the 80s. That would have been great. But I wouldn't remake it as a movie. I'd put it on the stage. I'd make it a musical. Maybe write full versions of some of those songs that Paul Williams just kind of wrote a couple of phrases for.
Oh, how would you deal with the arms deal scene?
How would I deal with the arms deal scene? Sensitively. Yeah, it would be a musical number. It would, because if Fair you're enough. Because I think in a musical, when you have people breaking out into song, you're already breaking the rules of reality. You're putting your audience knows that they're not to expect realism, and what they're seeing is absurd. So to do that scene as a musical number, I think maybe takes a little bit of the cringe factor out of it.
Yeah, it's the cringiest scene in the film, and I feel like that's probably the only way to deal with it. I like the idea of it as a musical.
That'll be fun.
I mean, it is a musical. There's definitely a lot of opportunities to explain things in song in order to make it a little bit more clear for first-time viewers.
Yeah, that's true. Exposition.
So like kind of like a let me get this straight scene, or like perhaps a narrator who's guiding you through it.
It'd be Jim Harrison. It'd be Jim Harrison filing his report.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, imagine that scene as a song between the two of them, where he's explaining how people get recruited. I think you've got a lot of great fodder for comedy. I think that a lot of the humor would play really well on stage, and I don't know exactly how you would do the shootout with the helicopters, but not my problem.
Right. Carrie, do you have any thoughts about how this would be, brought back nowadays?
I mean, when I first saw it, I think one of my initial thoughts was I kind of had this sort of frustrated thought of, this is going to be something that like Seth Rogen and James Franco remake, like an Adam McKay movie, which it would be funny, but at the same time, I was kind of like, oh, they'll remake it and it'll be really well received, and they'll give a lot of interviews about how, oh no, they stuck to the original script for the most part because they thought it was so funny, but like all this heaping of praise on the remake, and I was kind of like, I don't want it to be remade. I want people to discover the original and
a revival,
accept it. Yeah.
Just a
I
resurgence
think a revival,
of
or
once movie theaters are back open, more like late night screenings and just more buzz.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps,
I mean,
podcasts to talk about it in a positive way for the first time, because it's impossible to find anybody talking about it without bashing it. Just saying.
Yeah. I mean, but now that a musical is brought up, that's just like, my brain is immediately like, yes, I want this.
Yeah, and
it works.
I mean, And did Elaine May win the Tony recently?
She did. So I mean,
right.
the sort of good juju for Broadway is there.
Yeah, the stage loves Elaine May.
Oh yeah, yes. Well, I mean, Nichols and May together, both.
Yeah,
I mean, if you add the two of them, and then you have Mike Nichols, and I mean, I know that they're not the same. I associate them so much, and I feel like Mike Nichols was also so much of a. To me, it's always, from what I've known, that he's really had Elaine May's back and is like kind of one of those few people who understood her and actually like respected her work ethic and her perfection, and just that the reason that she wasn't going to settle for anything less than what she wanted.
And I do love how she kind of has this like F you attitude to, I don't know, the entertainment industry, and is still, doing awesome things out there, but definitely just like doesn't care what anyone else thinks. She's going to do what she's going to do, and unapologetically. I really love that about her.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
So I did have an idea for a remake. And I'm not saying that it's the best idea, but as I was watching this, the only thing I could think of, if this was to be brought back as a remake, is to make it a Flight of the Conchords movie. Because you have the two weird songwriters, and maybe they're not as, bad as songwriters as Rodgers and Clarke were, but they've got the dumb agent who would get them set up for a string of shows in Morocco. Uh-huh. The two of them you could see get into all this nonsense, and they're already established. And I think that it would be a way to do it without being like, we are just straight up remaking this movie, but doing it with an existing property, I think would be a fun way of approaching it. But I do like the musical idea, but I thought that I could see Jermaine Clement and Brett McKenzie doing this and kind of killing it. Or you have a sequel that's set just a few years later, and Rent comes out, and they realize that their melody's been stolen. Although with Jonathan Larson having passed, I think that could be problematic.
Yeah, don't know if we can do that. Yeah. But that's really interesting, like, man.
The past few days, all I could think of was how Seasons of Love just totally took that melody.
I did not pick up on that. I mean, I think I heard Seasons of Love so much in the mid to late 90s that I think my brain is just like done processing Seasons of Love. But Dangerous. Paul Williams snuck it back in, man, with Dangerous Business.
He did it. And I watched an interview with him that was just on YouTube, and he just speaks so lovingly about his experience writing this music for Ishtar, and, brings up a lot of good points. Maybe I'll sneak in a clip or two from that, but you just got to love Paul Williams.
I read the script, and it was very, very funny, and it was about writing, the songs for two bad songwriters. But to me, it just went, immediately went so much deeper than that. And I wanted to write totally believably bad songs. It's just, and you set songs up in such a way where they start off maybe really nice, where you go, well, these guys have talent, because I think they do. I think Chuck and Lyle were really talented. They're very real to me, incidentally. I got very method about this whole thing.
I don't know if we'll ever talk about Phantom of the Paradise, but it's just like one of the best movies I've ever seen. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not, no.
Oh, it's crazy.
I haven't seen it yet. It's kind of one of those also on the am I gonna give this a shot list. So
it's definitely worth it. It's it's a post-COVID movie that you're gonna want to watch with other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. So late night showings, Phantom of the Paradise, Ishtar, can't wait.
Ishtar on stage. That's right. So before we wrap up, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that we still need to cover for Ishtar?
I think just one last thing about Ishtar is that it's important to remember that this was the last film that Elaine May ever directed. It landed her in director jail, and even though she went on to write the screenplays for The Birdcage and Primary Colors, Ishtar is the last time that we have seen her vision in totality on film. And it's just kind of, it's a shame, and it's also absurd at the same time, because so many other directors have made monstrous, awful, bad flops and have gotten many second chances.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. No, seriously.
Yeah. And also,
like,
shout out to The Birdcage, just one of the greatest of the greats.
Perfect film.
Great comedy. And I also Primary Colors.
Oh,
if we're going to shout
so
out
good.
some more Elaine May. I mean, man, just imagine what could have been had her talent been better, nurtured and supported.
Yeah. It's sad that there are so many what ifs with Elaine May's career.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll always have Ishtar.
We'll always have Ishtar. So, Carrie, how can people find you online and read your articles?
I'm extremely online. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, Carrie Courogen. It's just my first name and last name. And my writing can be found at, I'm a contributing editor at Bright Wall Dark Room, the literary film journal, and I kind of freelance all over the place. Glamour, Garage, Paper Magazine, Vanity Fair, etc.
Well, we really appreciate that you joined us for this amazing
Thank you.
look at Ishtar.
Thank you for having me.
I can't believe those words just came out of my mouth. It's so good. So the next month of episodes, the month of May, is going to be, I'm so excited about this. It's all episodes focusing on movies curated by Millie DeCherico. She's the programming manager at Turner Classic Movies and programmer for TCM Underground, as well as the co-host of this hilarious podcast called Sorted Details, aka Sorted Deets. Millie's going to join us on our next episode. Dan, do you want to tell everyone what the movie's going to be?
Yeah, we're going to skate on back to 1992. It's time for The Cutting Edge.
I'm so excited. I watched it the other night. I'm not going to say anything. Carrie, have you seen The Cutting Edge?
Oh, I have.
Oh, okay. I cannot wait to talk about this movie. I'm not going to say anything yet.
Yeah, no, we won't. We will say nothing until the next time we talk.
Great sentence, Dan.
That's where my head's at. That's all I got for you now. So, good journey, Carrie and John.
Be well and good journey.
Telling the truth can be dangerous business. Honest and popular don't go hand in hand. If you admit that you can play the accordion, no one will hire you in a rock and roll band. But we can sing our hearts out all night. And if we're lucky, then no neighbors complain. Nobody knows where the beginning part starts out. But being human, we can live with the pain. Because life is the way we audition for God. Let us pray that we all get the job. Crying out loud gets you pointed and laughed at. Feel like a baby, only babies should cry. Somebody tell me how that rumor got started. Some things I know that only God knows why. But we can sing our hearts out. We can sing. Nobody knows where the heart starts out. We can live with the pain.
Ishtar shall rise again.